Hey, it's Jeff Zito, and thanks for listening to the Celebrity Jobber podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review. You can stream us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can find all of our past episodes on CelebrityJobber.com. And follow us, Celebrity Jobber Podcast, on Instagram and also our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@CelebrityJobber. My guest this week was a humongous star about 20 years ago. He became a heartthrob after he released his debut album, Beautiful Soul, back in 2004. I mean, he was all over TV like the Disney Channel and Nickelodeon. But before his music, you might have been familiar with Jesse McCartney playing the role of J.R. Chandler in the daytime soap opera All My Children. So how did Jesse get into the business? Did he ever have a job outside of showbiz? What was his first job? And what does he consider his big break? Maybe the thing that happened that took him to superstar status. And maybe we'll find out about some other jobs and work that he does outside of acting and music. He's my guest this week, Jesse McCartney, coming up here on Celebrity Jobber.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, give a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Check out all our past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
Hey, Jesse.
Hey, Zito, how you doing, man?
Good, man. How are you?
Living the dream, baby.
Oh, I can only imagine. Now I'm a little older than you, Jesse, so, I wasn't really your demographic when you were really hot, but I got to imagine those years, like 20 years ago. Tell me about those years. You were doing a lot of damage out there on the road, weren't you?
I definitely had a lot of fun, and honestly, those years I have nothing but, fond memories of. It's kind of been a whirlwind, and, I never expected to be in the position I am now. I always hoped and dreamed it would happen, and when it did, it was sort of surreal, and it went by so fast. Those years went by so fast, but, I look back on them now, and I'm just so grateful and have just such a great sense of gratitude for the opportunities I was given, and frankly, the fact that I can still do it, and the fans keep showing up year after year and come out to the tour and come see me play live. It's just a really great feeling.
It's pretty cool because you do have a new tour, and we're going to talk about that coming up in a little bit, but take me back all the way. You're from New York State. You grew up there. Was it acting first, then music, or was it always both?
It was actually the theater. So I started on Broadway. Both my mom and dad were theater rats in New York in the 70s and 80s. They did a lot of Broadway and off-Broadway productions, and I was sort of raised in this musical, theatrical family. And when I was a kid, my mom took me down to the city. I grew up in Westchester County, just outside of Manhattan, and she took me down, and I auditioned for a show called The King and I, which is a classic Rodgers and Hammerstein show, and I booked my first job as a 9-year-old kid touring. I did the national tour of The King and I for about 6 months around the U.S., and that's kind of how I cut my teeth, was on stage in the theater, and then it slowly sort of progressed and snowballed into different things. I did a lot of daytime television as a kid, and obviously music then took hold, but I grew up on stage, and that was sort of my first love.
So was that your first job, Jesse, the King and I? Was there another job that you had before that, maybe a regular job, or that was your actual first paying gig?
That was my first paying gig. I did a few community theater productions when I was 7 with my mom and dad on stage in this little sort of small Victorian-style theater in Irvington, New York, about 500 seats, and we did it as a family. It was like a family affair. And I did that for a couple of years, and someone came to the show and said, "Hey, I think your kid's got something. Bring him down to Broadway and see if he can try his hand." So it started with, as a family event, And then it went on from there. But yeah, it's been a wild ride.
So after all these years, have you ever had any job outside of show business? Have you ever had like a regular job? Were you ever a waiter? Were you ever anything other than in show business?
No, to be honest with you, I've never had another paying job outside of the entertainment industry. I was very blessed and fortunate that way that, I just kind of started young and kept it rolling, but it doesn't mean I didn't have parents to check me and keep me in line, let me tell you.
Well, I'm sure they did, because I never really read anything about you ever getting into any trouble, which is, something that a kid, when you were, 16 to, 20 years old, you should have been getting into trouble. Everybody else got into trouble. Your trouble should have been amplified by the press. But I never remember hearing about you getting into any trouble. So mom and dad must have kept you in check.
Yeah, I attribute that to just a great family and really solid friends. And honestly, my team. I've had pretty much the same team since I was 15, 16. Same manager, a lot of the same agents, and a lot of the same people to sort of be my guardrails and keep me in line and tell me no when I needed to hear it. And it's the most invaluable thing in my career.
What do you think, Jesse? Like, can you think about what your big break was? Was there something? I mean, because look, you've done like so much: the theater, you're singing, the albums, the tours, and of course the TV stuff, the daytime TV stuff. What do you think your big break was? Do you have one? Was there a series of things that happened to where, hey, I'm Jesse McCartney, like boom, overnight? What do you think that was?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. I mean, obviously, Beautiful Soul was the thing that sort of launched me into a different stratosphere of fame, and that was like sort of the big moment. But there were a lot of things prior to that kind of got the ball rolling. I think my time on All My Children as a daytime soap opera actor for a couple of years sort of put my name in the hat, and people started paying attention a little bit. I was nominated for like a daytime Emmy Award when I was, I think, 11 years old. And I think people then started taking notice. A lot of casting directors, a lot of people in the industry started looking at me. And, but clearly Beautiful Soul was, I think when I started entering American households and becoming a household name and even internationally, I remember being 16 and flying to Japan and can't speak the language, but people are singing my music. It was just such a surreal thing. And I think that's when I realized, okay, this is really happening.
So tell me about music. Let's talk about, you're a young guy, you're acting, and you come out with your first album. What were you always playing around with music at the time? When did you start, kind of getting into music and saying like, oh, let's give this a shot? How old were you?
I think it started, I had an opportunity. I was in a very short-lived boy band called Dream Street in 2000, I think it was. I was, the tender age of 12, 13 years old, and I was cast from this big, sort of cattle call of young boys that came in and auditioned for this boy band, and was cast as one of the 5 members, and we got signed to a deal with Atlantic Records. And that was sort of the beginning of it. But at the time, I hadn't really been doing any songwriting. I was just sort of performing the songs we were given. And then after the group sort of dismembered and we sort of fell apart, we went our separate ways. That's when I started taking an interest in music, as a solo act. And to be honest with you, at the time, I still wasn't writing. I found Beautiful Soul, believe it or not, on Taxi, which is like a publishing house, a publishing service.
Oh, wow.
Out of thousands and thousands of songs, we found that song, and we were like, this is pretty good. Let's record this. And I put together a little EP with my manager at the time, and still my manager, recorded it at her house, and the song sort of organically took off on Disney Radio. And then from there, I flew to L.A. and got signed to a major record deal. But, it wasn't until actually making the first album that I really started investing my time and my energy into songwriting. And I wrote a few songs on that first Beautiful Soul album. And then from that point on, I wrote everything, whether I co-wrote or wrote it myself. So it took a lot of years and a lot of time, but I just really fell in love with pop music. And as a kid, I grew up listening to pop, from Michael Jackson to Prince. And then in my generation, Craig David and Daniel Bedingfield and Robin Thicke were some of like huge vocal heroes for me. And I just tried to emulate what they did, to be honest with you. And that was my journey. And I'm still working at it. This new EP, All's Well, that's coming out on the 5th is, I think, some of my best songwriting. I think it's, we spent a lot of time tracking. We did everything live in the studio, which is something I haven't done in years, where we tracked all the rhythm section, live horns, live strings. And it was just really refreshing, and I think it's some of my best pop music.
And Jesse, a new tour, by the way, JesseMcCartney.com. You can see where Jesse is coming near you. Near me, you're going to be in Tampa a little bit later this month. A lot of people always talk about the music business, how grueling it is, what a tough business it is. How do you feel about the music business, and how do you think it's changed between now and when you first got into it?
Yeah, I mean, it is a grueling business. I think it's super challenging, and you see a lot of failure before you see any success, and even then, rarely do you see some success. And I think you really have to love it to put up with it. You have to have a thick skin, and you have to be able to hear, like, this isn't working, or that's not going to work. But as far as the evolution of the industry, things are radically different now because of social media. And in many ways, it's great, because young people now that are in the middle of nowhere in the United States, that are in their bedroom, can literally pick up their phone, play the guitar, and get discovered, which is not something that you were able to do when I was a kid. You had to get lucky, and I think now the tools are available to young people to be able to perform their talents, and if it is good enough, someone's going to recognize it, and I think that's really special. But yeah, I mean, I think the hardest thing for me is getting comfortable sharing so much. I think social media has changed that, where people are more as interested in your songs as they are, what you had for lunch. And so that was sort of a leap for me, is like, getting used to sharing more. But, it only helps, and it certainly helps with marketing music in a big way.
And then you get these people too, Jesse, that's like, you share something and, you suck, this sucks, this is like, you have that group of people that it doesn't matter what it is. It could be the greatest song ever recorded. That's hard too, to hear that kind of stuff.
Oh, well, there's always going to be haters, but ultimately, if it is good, the right people will take notice, and you will get discovered. But, my biggest thing I tell young people now when I give any advice is just to always, work on your craft and work on your musical talent and your abilities, and sharpen your pencils, because you never know what the next big app is going to be, whether it's TikTok this year, Instagram last year. Those things could collapse, and you have to have something real to fall back on other than just posting videos. So it's important to get really good at whatever your creative outlet is.
After this tour wraps up, maybe you're taking a little bit of a break. You have any aspirations of acting some more or doing something else?
100%. Acting's still a huge part of my life and my career, and I do a lot of voiceover work, especially. I'm constantly working in the voiceover world when I'm back home in LA, in between tours and in between albums. But I think one of the things I'm really excited about, my wife and I are pretty great at writing sketch comedy. My wife's a wonderful comedy writer, and so the two of us just geek out and have so much fun sitting literally in our kitchen writing stuff and then posting it to social media. So we're trying to nurture that a little bit and really come up with something great. I think ideally we'd love to have a little production company where we start doing sketch comedy or some sort of, either YouTube-based or TV-based comedy show. That's something I really want to focus on, I think, maybe after this album.
Great stuff. JesseMcCartney.com. Again, you can find out where he's coming to me in Tampa, the Ritz Theater in Ybor City. I saw the Foo Fighters there in 1994.
Oh, nice.
How about that? That was a long time ago.
Wow.
And real quick, you said you were a big fan of Prince. What's your favorite Prince album?
Oh, man. Purple Rain, probably?
Yeah, probably one of mine too. I still like 1999. I like Dirty Mind. I like Graffiti Bridge. I like Sign of the Times. I'm a huge Prince fan, so glad to know you are too.
One of the greatest of all time. It's so sad that he's no longer with us.
It is a shame, man. But Jesse, all the best to you, man. Great talking to you. You gave me some great stuff, man. Good luck.
All right, Zito. Thanks so much, man. Take care.
Again, I remember this guy back about 20 years ago. He was a heartthrob. He was like on the cover of all those teen magazines, and he was dating all of the, A-list Hollywood girls, the, Hillary Duffs, and you know what I mean? So he was humongous right around that time. And he was only, 16 years old. What a wild ride that had to be for Jesse McCartney. And before music, though, he's an actor. He started in the theater, like he told us. His mom and dad were kind of in that business. They were in the theater, so he was kind of born into show business and acting. And he said he started working. He had a couple of gigs, like when he was 7 with the theater. But his very first paying gig was The King and I. Went on a national tour, and he was 9 years old. That was his very first job. Never had a regular job. Didn't babysit or was a waiter or worked at a golf course. Showbiz. It's where he has made all his money all his life. 36 years old now. Very successful, going back out on the road. New album. And probably getting all of his old fans who are now, in their mid to late 30s. And he'll be able to, maybe get their daughters and have a whole new younger fan base. I think he talked about his big break possibly being on All My Children. He played the role of J.R. Chandler when he was a young guy, maybe about, 10, 11 years old. He was on a daytime soap opera, and that kind of got him introduced to the world. And I also thought it was interesting, outside of the acting and music, Jesse also works as a pretty successful voiceover artist, for like animation or some commercials. He does a lot of that. And then talked about doing some kind of sketch comedy with his wife, because during COVID, they came out with something called The Quarantined Couple that Jesse and his wife, Katie Peterson, wrote. So he was talking about wanting to start some kind of online sketch comedy web series. Cool story, very interesting, very talented guy, Jesse McCartney. He's got his YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Jesse McCartney. And, of course, his website, jessemccartney.com. You never know. Some of these celebrities, one big break away from being just a regular, ordinary guy like you and I. This guy had a little talent, though. Okay, he had a lot of talent. And his boyish good looks didn't hurt him either. There's a lot of interesting stories out there. You can check out past episodes on celebrityjobber.com. And our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/celebrityjobber. Again, I would appreciate subscribing, would love a 5-star rating, and leave a review. You can stream us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening to the Celebrity Jobber podcast. Until next week, I'm Jeff Zito.